Borg moved here, and the first time I ever saw CYBORG compete, we were at Nogi Worlds, the first Nogi Worlds that was hosted in California. And he was competing, and I was watching the matches. I was watching the Absolute because I had put my name in the Absolute. I had just become a black belt. It was the end of 2007. I had just gotten my black belt, and I registered as my first tournament at the Nogi Worlds as a black belt. And I did the weight class, and I beat Irapuru in the first round, who's a really good guy. And then I lost in the second round by one advantage to Daniel Moraes, who was really good.
Daniel, two-time world champion.
Yeah, very good. And I had him in trouble. I had him in a knee bar, and I lost 2-1 in advantages. And then I said, you know what? I'm going to sign up for the Absolute. I was still a little guy, and I signed up for the Absolute. And then I had I won one fight, and then I lost in the second fight to Tusa Alacar, I think is his last name.
Robert Alacar. And then is John Jonas, the Jiujitsu coach.
Yeah, I lost to Tusa in the Absolute. I actually lost 2 times to him in 2 Absolutes. I fought him again a couple years later and lost to him again. And
he was always tough.
He told me, he goes, man, I could have won the Absolute if I hadn't had to fight you. Because it was back and forth. It was like, we put like 20 points between each other in the fight. It was so much scrambles and so much craziness. But I ended up watching the Absolute, and I remember watching this guy with the mohawk. CYBORG had a mohawk, and he fought Lucas Leitch, who was a guy I had trained with a couple months earlier. Like, I'd spent the ADCC camp for 2007's ADCC. I ended up training with him and Leo Vieira and Andre Galvão. I'd spent this whole camp training with these guys. And I was watching Lucas because I knew how good he was. And I was like, man, Lucas is really good. He's probably going to win this, the Absolute. And he was beating CYBORG the whole round. And with a minute left, CYBORG footlocked him. And I just said, man, who is this guy with the mohawk, And then I kept watching.
So ugly.
Yeah. And then he won another match. And then, I kind of stopped watching. I don't know what happened. I don't remember the results of the finals of the Absolute. But I know... I watched him win a couple matches, and I was impressed. I was like, man, this guy moves really well for a big dude. And then, sure enough, like 3 months later, we were here in Florida, and I went to this Copa America Absolute in Lakeland. And I show up there, and CYBORG's there. And I signed up for the Absolute. They had a gi Absolute and a no gi Absolute.
I also fought this one too.
Yeah, I showed up for the Absolute, and Borg was there, and me and him, we ended up getting to the finals. He brought a bunch of the Fight Sports guys, and I beat some of the guys that were part of his team, and I ended up closing, in the finals with him. And we got to the finals, and he's like, he had this look on his face like he was going to kick my ass, and I was like, okay. And then I came out and took him down. And I remember when I took him down, it was our first conversation. I took him down, and he looked at me. He goes, yo, you're so strong, you little guy.
In the middle of the fight.
In the middle of the fight. He's like, you're a really strong, little guy. And I'm like, thanks. And then he got back up to his feet, and then he took me down, and then we scrambled, and then might have ended up taking me down again. But I remember he beat me on points, and it was like close. It was like 2 points difference. And when the match ended, he came over. He's like, where do you train? And I'm like, I train, in South Florida with Pablo Popovich and I, some guys, some friends, and this, that, the other. And he's like, is there anybody in your gym that's as good as you? And I'm like, yo, my instructor is way better than me. And he's like, really? And I'm like, yeah. He goes, I'm going to come visit you. He goes, give me your number. And I'm like, okay. And, people say that all the time. Like, hey, I'm going to come visit you.
Yeah.
But how often do they do, it's just words, Bro, I swear, we fought on Saturday. On Tuesday, he came and we trained. And I remember that day like it was today. We trained for like 2 hours. We did like an open mat, like a private pro training. That was the first pro training. This is where the origination of pro training came from. It was like him. He brought 3 guys. He brought 4 guys in a 2-seater Jaguar that he had. He shoved 4 guys in it. And then it was about 4 of us from Pablo's gym. It was me, Pablo, and a couple other guys that we train with that still black belts today. And when the rounds ended, we all kind of sat on the wall, like exhausted. When everybody's kind of like just done. We just kind of sat there, and we kind of sat in silence for a while. And then somebody said like, man, that was really good. We should do this more often. And he's like, yeah, I think we should. And he's like, I'm going to do it again Thursday. And we're like, yeah, let's do it again Thursday. And that was it. That's how the Tuesday, Thursday no-gi pro training started. And we did that for years. And then, you know, that same next year, Pablo was three-time at that time. He was 3-time ADCC silver medalist. And he had never won the ADCC. He was a silver medalist 3 times behind Marcelo Garcia. And then CYBORG started training with us, and Pablo, you know, sent a message to the guys from ADCC, and he's like, hey, I'm training with this guy. He's a world champion in no-gi. You know, he's really good. You guys should consider inviting him. And they were like, okay, we'll invite him. And they invited CYBORG, and we went, us 3, to Barcelona.
2009?
2009, yeah. And then Pablo beat Marcelo, and CYBORG got to the finals against Verdum.
Wow.
You know, first year out. You know, first ADCC, he was silver medalist. And then...
that's insane.
Yeah, and that was it, man. And that became our little group.
And you guys made the name of this group the Avengers, right?
Yeah, many years later, like 2 years later, a year later, I don't remember how long after, we ended up creating a unified team called the Avengers between, you know, Pablo's school. I had a school already at that point, and CYBORG school. And we had a lot of guys that were coming from all over, man. Like, today, people talk about how great our pro training is, and people come here in video, and they go, oh, man, you guys have some of the best training in the world. I honestly believe that back then it was better than it is today.
Even Bochecha was training with you guys.
Back in the day, it was so crazy. Some days it would be like today we have, you know, some in the room, we'll have how many? 10 black belts. Mm-hmm. And then we have like, you know, 10 purple belts, brown belts, and blue belts. Or there was no blue belts, purple belts, or brown belts in the room. It was all black belts, and it was like 20 guys, 25 guys. And it was kill or be killed. You know, it was like the wild, wild west. You know, some days it would be like, you know, Pablo, CYBORG, Jeff Munson, Bochecha, you know, myself, you know, I remember Cavaca being there. It was like just so many guys, so many good guys in one room all the time. You know, Gilbert Burns made appearances in those rooms. You know, there was a lot of people that it was just crazy.